Chapter 24. The Forming of the Resistance. High Priest Cassius oversaw the hangings personally. As word of the routing of his Black Warrior forces at the tavern had come to him, he had ordered all those that had fled to be rounded up and dealt with. After several days, 20 former Black Warriors had been found, stripped to a loincloth, and were hung in front of his remaining army, as warning to any others who would think about deserting the Legion. A great circle of hanging bodies hung listlessly from the ramparts of Cassius's stone fortress, and several crows cawed at each other as they landed upon the bodies and ripped pieces of flesh from the corpses. As the bodies swayed on their ropes, and the choking faces turned black from the trapped blood, Cassius, dressed in his personal armor, addressed his men from the ramparts of his fortress. Using a technology that no longer existed, the High Priest's voice boomed out on instruments that greatly magnified the sound of his voice. His whole army listened to his words, amazed at how loud and clear they were. The assembled men looked upon their great leader, who wore a brilliantly shining armor made of gold and red colors, with a horned helmet that did not reveal his eyes. His loud and commanding voice boomed out, "By now, you have undoubtedly heard of the Battle of the Tavern in the center of the Great Forest. In the coming days, we will send 50 platoons there to wipe that location off the face of Earth. We will hunt any resistance down into the forest and cut them down," Cassius intoned. The assembled Black Warriors all obediently held up their weapons and cheered in unison. After a moment, the warriors grew quiet and the leader spoke again. "Should any of you think of deserting, I will kill every man, woman, and child you have ever known as punishment. You will fight to the death to defend your Lord's commandments." Cassius paused, came up with an idea, then said one final thing. "The Dark Lord has promised a farm and a sack of gold to any man who brings me the heads of the resistance leaders," lied Cassius. The men cheered again, this time with genuine appreciation. "Commanders, move your men out," he cried, then turned and walked back into his awaiting fortress. The commanders all gave the salute of obeisance and began calling out orders to move their platoons onto the various roads that left the fortress in the direction of the center of the great forest. Cassius removed his helmet once he was inside his fortress. His new manservant quickly ran up to him and bowed. "Bring the envoy into my throne room," the leader commanded. The servant bowed again and moved off to obey his master's command. Cassius walked into his throne room and picked up a jeweled goblet that he filled with liquor. Taking a long drink of the smoky beverage, his servant knocked on the large wooden doors and bowed down as several older men in tribal clothing and armored headdresses walked into the throne room. Cassius turned toward them and said, "Greetings, special warriors. The Dark Lord bids you welcome into his service." The temperature in the room began to fall, and soon Cassius was near to shivering. "Cassius," hissed the leader of the new arrivals, "why have you summoned us from our eastern mountains?" asked the tribal shaman known as Clytus. Shivering, Cassius looked at the man, then suddenly moved in a burst of speed to grab the leader by the throat and lift him up with one hand high into the air. "Remove your demons from my atmosphere immediately," commanded Cassius. The tribal leader Clytus hung by his throat in the powerful priest's hand and squeaked out a command to his subordinates, and the temperature in the room returned to normal. Cassius slowly lowered the tribal man to the ground and said, "Good, now we can get down to business." He moved away and sat upon his throne while Clytus rubbed at his throat and scowled at the leader. "The Dark Lord executes the agreement and commands you to ready your demons to assemble at his personal stronghold." Clytus looked shocked at the news. "His stronghold? I don't understand. The danger. He has never," said Clytus, but was interrupted by Cassius. "You will obey his command," Cassius leaned in, "or suffer the consequences." Clytus paused, then bowed and said, "The Dark Lord's command." "Now get out and attend the Lord at his bidding," said Cassius, giving a casual flick of his hand in dismissal. Clytus scowled but bowed as he and his entourage moved out of the throne room into the nearby corridors. One of the other tribal warriors began speaking and said, "How dare he?" But Clytus held up a hand and said in their private language, "Do not speak until we have left this building." The next day, Cerberus walked out of the tavern into the morning sun and stretched with a big grin on his face. He saw Euclidean and his man Cheeno talking together and walked over to speak with the two men. "Good day," said Cerberus lightheartedly. Euclidean looked over at the man and smiled. "Have we seen our glowing savior yet?" inquired Cerberus. "He went off with Jacen and Darstad into the forest early this morning and said they would return about midday," said Cheeno. Cerberus nodded, then looked over at Euclidean. I saw your fight against Cliven the Beast in Greenwaldia 2 summers ago. It was a great fight, he told the Fist Champion. Euclidean smiled and said, Cliven was a great fighter, but he had not trained effectively and soon lost his breath. Cerberus put his hands upon his side and with a mischievous grin said, I think it is every man's passion to put himself up against the best, at least once in his life. What do you say? Euclidean glanced at the man and said, A friendly bout, first one to knock the other from his feet. Cerberus smiled and took off his tunic to begin stretching when he noticed Euclidean's bandaged torso. I didn't realize you were wounded. Perhaps another time, he said and began donning his tunic. No worries, friend. I don't think you'll be able to stop me, Euclidean said in a friendly tone, bringing laughs and jeers from the small group of men that had gathered to see the sparring contest. Cerberus shrugged and removed his tunic once again and approached Euclidean to take his stance in the rough circle that was prepared by Cheeno. Euclidean stretched for a moment, then approached Cerberus in the circle. The 2 men lightly struck fists in the ceremonial gesture of good faith, then Cheeno shouted, Begin! Cerberus ran in and double-punched Euclidean against his torso, causing the man to grunt and dodge away. Cerberus feinted left, then moved in to backhand Euclidean, who saw the move coming and grabbed the man's incoming hand, only to pull him into a savage hip throw, landing Cerberus onto the ground, where the large man landed in a heap. Cerberus lay upon the ground dazed, with the wind knocked from him, while Cheeno chuckled into his hand. Euclidean bent down and pulled the large man up from the ground. You were telegraphing that punch, and you should watch the movement of your shoulders, he said as the large tracker regained his wits. It's over? Cried Cerberus. I can't believe it! Of course, if we were fighting with weapons, it might be a different story, he said good-naturedly. Euclidean said, Let my man show you. Cheeno! Cheeno came over to the circle and took up a position with Euclidean and struck fists. Cerberus dusted himself off, then moved back from the circle. Once clear of the circle, he hollered, Begin! And the 2 fighters began moving in a counterclockwise motion, each looking for an opening for an attack. Cheeno moved through a combination of strikes that caused Euclidean to defend himself, but Euclidean, familiar with the combination, executed a counterattack at the last moment that soon had Cheeno on the defense. The 2 men circled back and forth, and many men surrounded the 2 with cheers and sounds of encouragement shouted out from the periphery of the fight. Neither of the men could pull off a decent attack upon the other, and soon Cerberus called a halt to the exhibition. Euclidean was breathing heavily, and he approached Cheeno and clapped him on the shoulder. You are a fine fighter, Cheeno, Euclidean said with a measure of pride in his tone. Cheeno breathed in disbelief that he had fought so well against his master. Catching his breath, Cheeno looked at his master, who was beaming at him, and momentarily recalled his private encounter with the assassin Contact, who he had spoken with several times in the last year. The man had followed Cheeno and cornered the manservant in an alley one day while he was on an errand for Euclidean. The Contact had identified who he was by showing his hidden tattoo on his earlobes and had quickly presented his proposal. All we wish for you to do is watch Euclidean and report to us, the man had said. Cheeno had laughed in the man's face and said, Why on earth would I do this? The man had removed a bag from within the folds of his dark clothing and had tossed the bag over to Cheeno. Cheeno took the bag and saw several gold coins within, a fortune. The young manservant looked up at the assassin with disbelief as the man said, You will receive 1 bag identical to this one each time you give us a report on Euclidean. I will meet you again in 30 days at this location. The man had quickly disappeared into the throng of people moving about the marketplace and was soon hidden from sight despite Cheeno's best effort to find him. With mixed feelings, he had taken the bag of coins and had hidden them in a secret location on his master's estate, and had met the assassin again 1 month later to tell him where Euclidean would be fighting next. The assassin had nodded and had tossed over another bag of coins to Cheeno before saying, 1 month, here. He had quickly disappeared into the night, and Cheeno felt horrible at the small betrayal of his master who had taken such loving care of him. In his guilt, he had hidden the gold coins with the first batch and had continued meeting the assassin and collecting his payment each month, and now he had a large personal treasure that he thought to use to help him when he left his master's service. Now he looked upon Euclidean smiling at him, and his heart felt like it was going to burst in shame. Master, I have betrayed you, Cheeno said, and fell to his knees to begin weeping. Cerberus and the men surrounding them moved off in a silent way, embarrassed at the show of emotion from the young manservant. Euclidean knelt by his young manservant and said, I know of your betrayal, my young friend. Cheeno looked up at his master with a stunned expression. Euclidean nodded and said, I found your hidden treasure and recently followed you to see who you would meet. You should know your contact is dead. Cheeno's heart broke then, and he wept as his master held him. As he held the crying young man, Euclidean said, "Our contract is complete, and you are released from my service, Cheeno. As is the custom of the Master, I give you a parting gift, my share of our earnings on this adventure, to help you make your own way." Cheeno wept on his master's neck when Euclidean said this, stunned at the great gift of wealth his master offered to him. After a moment, he collected himself and asked, "And what of the assassins that hunt you?" Euclidean paused and looked grave as he said to his pupil, "I will deal with them in my own way." Aramis limped as he walked out of the tavern using the crutch that Hecate had given him. His side constantly ached in pain from the sword wound as he walked alongside his daughter Hope. "We should depart as soon as possible. Katie and Kyle will be greatly missing us, I fear," said Aramis. "Papa, I want to stay and fight against the Dark Lord," said Hope. Aramis paused in his walk to stare at his daughter. "How could you want to fight and kill, after all I and your mother have taught you?" he asked his daughter in an incredulous tone of voice. Hope's eyes filled with tears at the mention of her mother, and as the tears began coursing down her cheeks, she said, "It is because of Mother that I wish to fight. The Black Warrior Legion has done nothing but hurt the farmers, and there needs to be something different in the land. I want to be part of making things better," she tearfully explained. "You are just 15 years old. I forbid it," her father shouted in a weak voice. Hope gentled at her father's weak voice and said, "Father, I love you and the twins with all of my heart, but you must not forbid me this plan. If you do so, I would just run away from you, and I would not have that on my heart in the upcoming days apart from you." Aramis took on a stubborn expression, then turned and limped away from Hope. The young girl watched him go, feeling completely alone. At that moment, something in her heart changed, and she realized she would be alone in all her decisions from now on. Putting on her own stubborn expression, Hope wiped the tears away from her face, picked up her bow, and began shooting arrows at nearby targets in determined practice.